Today I'm going to give you a hands-on look at this RP6 handheld. I got mine a bit late, but at least it arrived before the end of the year. The RP6, as you likely know, runs on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. I've actually reviewed quite a few devices featuring the 8 Gen 2 chip before. The RP6, however, introduces a significant change from previous models. It offers two distinct layouts. One, like the unit I'm holding, features dual joysticks positioned at the bottom. The other configuration places the left joystick at the top, a layout quite similar to what you'd find on an Odin or even the Nintendo Switch. Since I already have an Odin 2, I chose the one with the dual joysticks at the bottom. This has always been the classic RP series layout. Of course, some people might prefer the NS layout and would probably choose the version with the joystick at the top. This time, the RP6 offers everyone a choice. Whether you prefer the dual joysticks at the bottom or an asymmetrical layout, there's definitely an option available to suit your preference. Regarding the device, the RP6 is an upgraded version of the RP5. Regarding the colors, there are actually several versions available. Personally, I chose this gray one. Why is that? Well, when in doubt, go with gray, that's what I think. While it might not be the most aesthetically pleasing choice, it's definitely a dependable and foolproof option you can count on. Now, regarding the buttons, just take a look at this D-pad. I've truly never had any complaints about the RP's D-pad, as it's quite flexible and avoids accidental presses. I've tried many combos and it doesn't misregister up, down, left, or right. And on the front, it still has the four function buttons placed prominently in each of the four corners. There was actually a previous version that resembled a PSP, having a notably wider bottom bezel. I imagine it was much like my PSV, with a broader lower edge, where several buttons would have been situated. However, that specific iteration was deemed unattractive by the public and was ultimately rejected through a vote. I personally felt it possessed a charming vintage aesthetic, but nonetheless this particular device. The ABXY buttons on this device, I'd say they feel relatively loose and soft. They're definitely softer than the previous ABXY buttons. I also have an RPG2, which is essentially the same machine as the old RP5, but I specifically chose the new NS blue color scheme for this one. Now, regarding its buttons, you can actually feel the texture and listen to the distinct sound they make. They're quite stiff. And then the RP6, I honestly really like its buttons. They're softer, but honestly they could still be a bit softer, just a little softer, and the feel would probably be even better. And its two front-facing components are located in the bottom left and bottom right corners. Actually, if you look closely and compare the RP6 and the RP5, their designs are truly quite similar. Perhaps it's because people really appreciate this modern aesthetic, which is very much like the NS. Its layout, including its placement, is very NS-like. It lacks that distinct retro vibe, however. Well, it's got a more modern feel to it, and between the 6 and the 5, this G2 actually shares the same look as the 5, just with a different color scheme. You can clearly see that their lengths are quite similar. Now, regarding the width, the RP6 is actually slightly smaller than the RP5, or even this G2, in my opinion, just by a tiny bit. And regarding its thickness, you can observe, visually speaking, I actually find the 6 to be considerably thicker than the 5, or even the G2. This is precisely why it accommodates a larger battery and boasts superior heat dissipation. And so, I really think the RP6 is basically the ultimate mainstream handheld console for serious gamers right now. Because whether you're using something like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, or the Dimensity 9300, or even the newer 8S, all these devices can pretty much effortlessly run PlayStation 2 games and anything older than that. Now for the NS, you can definitely run some emulators, though it might not be a perfect experience. After all, if your main goal is to play NS games, a modded OLED isn't terribly expensive and an older NS Lite is even cheaper. Let me elaborate a bit on my personal experience. We've already discussed the button feel, so let's briefly move on to the joysticks. I actually feel that the joysticks on this particular model are quite good, relatively speaking. They still have a low-profile design that isn't too protruding, which makes the device quite portable. However, the range of motion for these joysticks isn't particularly wide, you see. As I demonstrate, it feels like a rather compact joystick, not one of those larger extended types. I genuinely believe if the joysticks were made slightly taller, enabling a broader control radius, the tactile experience would probably feel significantly more comfortable and user-friendly overall. Now regarding the material, although it's grey, it's actually quite different from the grey used on the old RP5. Its surface boasts more of a metallic paint, as you can observe from its reflective sheen. It's indeed more of a metallic paint finish, marking a significant departure from the previous material. Personally, I actually preferred the RP5's material. It offered a more refined, even somewhat retro, aesthetic. And it also has a bit of a retro feel to it. Down below, it's still the same as before. The USB-C output should support up to 4K 60 frames per second. Over here is the TF card slot and the 3.5mm audio jack. And up top, there's the L and R buttons, which are also linear triggers. The biggest change is that this area used to be made of that raw plastic material, and they would add a lot of anti-scratch texture. This time, after switching to the metallic paint, that texture is gone, so it feels a bit slippery when you touch it. But actually, I think it's quite alright. The buttons feel pretty good. It's not truly slippery, but when you touch it, the tactile sensation is rather smooth, which I find to be actually quite comfortable. The top is basically the same, with the volume buttons and the power button, no real changes there. Then, on the front, there's also this microphone hole. The 4 keys. The bottom left and bottom right are Android keys, one for the home screen and one for going back. On the top left and top right, you'll find the select and start buttons respectively. And this time, it's added something new. It now includes back buttons, quite similar to the Odin's design. The original Odin did have back buttons, but this particular design is a first for RP. It's their initial implementation of back buttons, if my memory serves me right. I believe the RP5 is the first to incorporate them. Additionally, there's another rather significant change right here with the fan vent. Actually, there are 2. This one is functional, and this other one is purely decorative. It features a metal grille, and I find the perforations in this grille to be remarkably well executed. They are incredibly precise and uniformly spaced. Along the side, you will find the screws for dismantling the device. You simply undo those screws, then gently pry it open starting from this point. This spot, the body can be pried open from top and bottom. Look at this gap. I really think RP's build quality in this generation, with the 5 and 6 models, has become exceptionally good. Compared to older devices, the attention to detail is significantly improved. See, the gap here is perfectly seamless, and the one at the bottom, including this scene right here, is also incredibly smooth. The craftsmanship of this machine genuinely represents a significant leap forward. While its price has indeed increased, the attention to detail in its construction has undeniably improved by a considerable margin. So, having covered the general features of this device, let's now delve into the variety of games you can actually enjoy playing on it. With this octa-core processor, playing games from systems like PS2 or even Wii U is a breeze. You can easily run PS2 games at 3 or 4 times their native resolution. Currently, I've got the ESD front-end installed on this device. It's an integrated package from a creator originally designed for Odin, but I've directly adapted it for the RP. The only adjustment I had to make was what exactly? The package was set up for the Odin controller, but the RP has its own RP controller. For some standalone games, you might just need to go in and change the controller settings to get it working. Now let's talk about some common issues you might run into after getting it. The most common one is people saying, hey, your screen looks really red or yellow. Why is that? They say that in the pull-down menu, you'll clearly notice the color isn't purely white. However, this isn't actually an issue with the RP itself. So what exactly is the real problem? The thing is, the native Android system has a rather peculiar feature. Within its wallpaper settings, you will notice that the theme, specifically the color of its pull-down menu, is dynamically generated from the chosen wallpaper. For instance, the RP's wallpaper has shades of black, yellow, and brown, which means the theme colors it provides are derived directly from those tones. There isn't a single option there that allows you to select white. For example, look at this one. It's yellow. And now I've selected this. If I were to choose this one, just take another look, alright? Many people comment on a reddish hue, but it's not truly that the device itself is red-tinted. Rather, the theme gives the impression that it's very red. This is an inherent issue with stock Android themes. I really think RP should have just set a whiter default, and this entire misunderstanding might have been entirely prevented. Also, there's another common thing that people dislike, and that's this navigation bar at the bottom. This too is an original Android feature. Let's go back into the system settings, then to gestures, and then gesture navigation. Head into the gear icon for gesture navigation, scroll all the way down, and you'll find the option for the home bar. This is the home bar. Just deselect it, and your screen will be restored to its full view. Compared to the RP5, this screen maintains the same size. It's a 5.5-inch Full HD 1920 by 1080 OLED display. However, its refresh rate has been upgraded, going from 60 to 120 Hz. This is particularly beneficial for those who enjoy PC gaming or streaming, especially for titles such as Silksong or Hades. These, at 120 Hz, will feel much more fluid, but honestly, 60 Hz is pretty adequate in my opinion. Furthermore, this device's battery has been boosted from 5,000 mAh to 6,000 mAh compared to the RP5, so its battery life should see a slight improvement. Now let me show you the weight of this device. This is a scale. Let's check the weight here. 311. I have a screen protector on it and a TF card inside, making the total weight about 311 grams. Now, let's make some comparisons. Take, for example, the PSV 2000, a truly traditional handheld. That one only weighs around 200-something grams. Then there's the Odin 2. The Odin 2 is quite heavy. It's around 400, 460, 410. And then there's the RP, for example, the RP5. Oh, since I don't have the RP5 right now, I'll show you this GTI2. It doesn't look very big, but it's actually quite heavy, around 275 grams. So the RP6 is a few dozen grams heavier than the RP5. Its battery and thermal management are the main focus. I have already tested the machine's performance, so I will show you some screenshots instead of rerunning all the tests again. This way, we will save time and still get a clear picture of its capabilities. Okay, so if we scroll all the way to the right in these screenshots, the first thing I did was run Geekbench 6 to test its CPU performance. You'll notice that its multi-core score, when compared to a standard phone equipped with an 8 Gen 2 processor, actually comes in about 10% higher than devices like the Xiaomi 13 or Samsung's S23 Ultra that are in the database. This is because it has. It scores just over 5,000, hitting 5,600. This is reasonable because a phone's benchmark scores are limited. Unless it's a media review unit or specially tuned to run without restrictions, heat dissipation is a big issue. This device has active cooling with several fan settings by default and joystick lights. Oh, I didn't mention the joystick lights, so its benchmark scores will definitely be higher, and its single-core performance is also. It even outperforms the S23 Ultra and the S23 Plus. So here are its Geekbench 6 scores. You can take a look. 2,000 for single core and 5,500 for multi-core. Yeah, that's about right. Next, you can take a look at some of my emulator results. This is Tears of the Kingdom running on CMU. Honestly, if you want a perfect Tears of the Kingdom experience, then you definitely need to get the 12GB version, because my Odin was originally 12GB, but this time I chose the 8GB model. I wanted to see what it was like. And yeah, for sure, look at Tears of the Kingdom. After running it for a short while, right after jumping down from the Sky Island, the 8GB of memory was almost full, with only 800 megabytes left. The monitoring software I had open to check power consumption data and stuff was killed in the background, so the memory is really not enough, and I even had a 4GB swap file enabled. But it's definitely playable. However, if you want to fully immerse yourself and truly enjoy the game, I honestly still recommend using the original console. Or you could do what I did and purchase Tears of the Kingdom for the NS2. The visuals will be immensely smoother, many times over, compared to the NS one. Once you've played Tears of the Kingdom on the Switch 2, you won't really want to go back to the first one. Alright, so this is my screenshot illustrating a major advantage of this 8 Gen 2 device. You see, I had a monitor running here, and initially, before any heavy action, the CPU was only drawing 3.8 watts in the minimap area. This indicates excellent CPU power efficiency. Furthermore, its compatibility is superb. It can flawlessly run numerous Nintendo Switch games using a mere 4 watts. 4 or 5 watts depending on the game, of course. In standard mode, you can see the CPU and GPU have some headroom. For small games, it should run very smoothly. But the memory, with 98% of the 8GB of RAM consumed, is definitely insufficient for smooth operation. And also, I didn't even enable high performance mode here. I just used the older T-Series and L-Series drivers. I didn't go out of my way to pick specific ones, and you can see the textures look completely fine. No obvious issues at all. That's a huge benefit of an older CPU, like the 8 Gen 2. It's been fine-tuned for ages, so its compatibility is outstanding. And as for charging, this device theoretically supports 27-watt charging, but when I tested it with my Xiaomi charger, I started charging at around 40%, and it took over an hour and a half to get to full 1 hour and 40 minutes, to be precise, for 60% of the battery. When I initiated the charge, the power was slightly above 20 watts, not reaching 27 watts. This could be due to my Xiaomi charger, as it's not a standard USB PD type. Furthermore, I didn't begin charging from a low battery state. I started from about 40%. It's likely that charging from 10% would be quicker. But seriously, when you factor in the total time, even just going from 10% to 40% at 27 or 28 watts, I'd guess that would still take you a good 20 to 30 minutes. So a full charge for this 6,000 mAh battery is probably going to be a bit over 2 hours. That sounds about right, wouldn't you say? Regarding the charging time, you'll notice that the graph shows a long flat section later on, while the initial charging is relatively fast. You might achieve 30 to 40% in about half an hour, but after that, it gradually slows down. In terms of performance release, this device demonstrates quite good stability. I conducted a 3D Mark Solar Bay Light stress test, which involved 20 loops, and you can observe the results here. The total power draw. Well, the battery drops from about 52% to 43% after 20 loops, so it's relatively power efficient. The battery temperature goes from 33 to 36 degrees, and we can look at the results of the 20-loop stress test. The highest score was 1,108, and the lowest was 1,087, which is only a 1.9% drop. This stability is actually very good. It even performs better than some devices that are larger in size. Therefore, making the device's body thicker is logical and offers advantages. Despite being thicker, it significantly improves heat dissipation capabilities. And look at its benchmark scores, over 20 loops. It's basically a straight line with no major fluctuations, and I ran this using the standard mode. Then I ran it again using the high performance mode, and you'll see it actually has 3 modes: a regular mode, a standard mode, and a performance mode. Honestly, the benchmark scores for the standard and performance modes aren't very different. I just let the fan run on smart to manage itself, so there wasn't a significant change. So, for daily use, using the smart fan with its regular setting will generally make it quieter, and it also contributes to a lighter device overall. That Nintendo Switch game, Mario Wonder. As you can observe, I launched it on my desktop, and it probably utilized a good portion of the memory. There wasn't a significant amount of free memory remaining, but there were still a couple of gigabytes left. Then, in-game, the device runs at 60 frames per second, save for loading map cache. Power consumption is around 3.7 to 4 watts. Later, I'll have a separate video testing this game, which you can watch at the end. I won't be narrating that part. Regarding the PS2, I'm utilizing micro mode settings, specifically at 3 to 4 times the resolution. You'll observe that this actually leads to a greater power draw, as at such a magnified resolution, the GPU becomes completely maxed out. Then, at the very beginning of God of War 2, in that highly demanding scene where the character pushes against the wall, you can observe, my apologies, that the CPU is already consuming 8.5 watts, which is quite significant. If you just lower the resolution multiplier a little, the power consumption will decrease. At 8 watts, we calculated that the battery, which is around 6,000 mAh times 3.7 volts, gives about 20 Wh. So at 8 watts, you get just over 2 hours, maybe less than 3. The settings are just too high. For PS2, I really recommend not pushing the image quality too much. If you want to play, don't push the image quality or resolution multiplier too high. At high multipliers, PS2 uses a lot of power, but if you lower it, it becomes very power efficient. Now for the 3DS issue, I started with a screen mask, but I don't really recommend it, because this is an OLED screen, and with OLED screens, if you use a bright overlay like this for a long time, you might get screen burn-in. I suggest choosing a dark-colored red or green screen mask. Avoid blue because blue pixels have the shortest lifespan, and a lower brightness will also improve longevity. And here with Mario 3D Land, the power consumption is only about 2 watts. It runs effortlessly, even with triple the resolution, very smoothly. Oh, my apologies. Actually, I had the display set to 4 times the resolution. I am currently using the Citra emulator for this, as you can see, which is Azaha. And for older classic games, there's not much exciting to see. They typically consume around 1 point something watts, not even reaching 2 full watts. But of course, games run very smoothly, and the multipliers are high too. I used a screen mask here too, which looks a bit better. Actually, with an OLED, if you choose a black mask, it should be fine. For Wii U, I tried Mario 3D World. Its power consumption is around 6 watts. It's not struggling, but it is relatively demanding on the hardware. It uses a lot of CPU, and the CPU and GPU usage is high. And it's quite high at over 6 watts. If you calculate it like that, you'd get a little over 3 hours of battery life. And then there's Red Tower on the NES, which also consumes about 1.7 watts of power. You can see that with this 8-core CPU, no matter what game it's running, even the lightest ones will have a baseline power consumption of about 2 watts. If you calculate based on a 20 watt-hour battery, the battery life for these light load games will be around 10 hours. For storage, I didn't initially test the read-write speed. After I had filled about 60 to 70% of the drive, with just a few gigs left, I tested it. The sequential read was 1800 megabytes per second, and sequential write was 1600 megabytes per second. With UFS 3.1, you don't need to worry about speed. And that part there, that was just the test results. Then finally, let's discuss the machine's grip, because I totally forgot to bring it up earlier. The grip on this thing, it's quite substantial, I'd say. Comparatively speaking, it's not like other devices where the grip is smaller and flatter. This one is more like an L size. This grip, I think it's pretty good, actually. The curvature is all right, but if your hands are especially big, given that this device is only 5.5 inches and quite narrow, you'll probably feel a bit of an empty space in your hand when you hold it. However, there's one thing I'm not particularly fond of. The LR buttons are situated right on the grip. This means your hands naturally fall onto them when you hold it. If you enjoy using the back buttons, then their placement is actually quite good. However, if you're not particularly fond of these back buttons, you might find that your grip feels somewhat broken or disrupted right at that spot, precisely because your hand naturally rests upon these buttons. I don't think. Well, for me personally, I don't really like using back buttons. I feel a simple grip would be more comfortable. Finally, let's talk about the configuration. This device comes in 2 configurations, 8 plus 128 GB and 12 plus 256 GB. I chose the 8 plus 128 GB because I already have other devices. But if you're a typical buyer, I suggest aiming for the 12 plus 256 GB model. Otherwise, you've bought such a powerful machine, right? And if it's slightly less on memory, it will perform a bit worse in heavy games, which is always unpleasant. Plus, 256 GB is certainly more sufficient for storage needs. And if you're installing an integrated package, you can pair it with a 512 GB TF card. But TF card prices have gotten a bit crazy lately. I used to get a 512 GB card for around 200 yuan through overseas online shopping. Now buying one normally is a bit expensive. And finally, let's talk about how to choose a device. If you already have a machine like the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, Honestly, if you're upgrading from an RP device to a G2 or from a G2 to an R46, the upgrade is actually quite minor. The P5 can actually handle many games and even run emulators like C2 and L1. It's simply that its 865 performance isn't really up to par. The G2, however, is generally sufficient for those kinds of tasks. The processor that the G2 utilizes, in fact, it's essentially an 8-core youth edition that delivers about 80 to 90% of the performance. If CPU performance is comparable, the GPU performance will be slightly weaker. However, if you're playing a CPU-intensive game, the difference between the two becomes very minimal. However, if your demands are high regarding the GPU, then it would be slightly better, but not to the extent of a generational leap. It's just that if one is an 80 on a scale of 100, the other might be a 70. If you're upgrading from the G2 to this one, I don't see a significant benefit. However, the G2 only comes with an 8GB version, whereas this one offers a 12GB version. That's a massive difference, creating a qualitative leap between the two. So if you're looking to run a PC emulator such as Gaishi or maybe Winlight or even a Switch emulator, then the 12GB space will definitely offer much more significant advantages. Then, at the end of this video, we'll delve into the gameplay mechanics and then capture some actual footage to demonstrate it. When it comes to gameplay, many users might not have had prior experience with Android devices. Personally, I prefer using an integrated package because adjusting all these settings can be quite bothersome. You have to follow instructions for everything. While many might claim that using an integrated package means you're falling behind the times, with this one, you'll definitely feel, right? When you're dealing with these kinds of devices, it's really all about collecting them. You might not actually end up playing a whole lot of games on them, but it's still essential to have them as part of your collection. And if you find yourself not fond of this particular integration package, you can always just download your games individually from platforms like iWoo or others. Regarding emulators, the majority are included in this comprehensive package. Even if you choose not to utilize the entire package, you can simply download the emulator component. Once installed, you will have access to most of the necessary emulators, effectively supporting all your gaming platforms. Some platforms like C1, MU, or Winlight require separate individual settings. You can set them up independently. For other platforms, it's relatively straightforward. With the 8-core performance, you'll find smooth gameplay without many additional settings. The only thing you really need to configure is the NS emulator. Its primary settings are typically found within the driver management section. For instance, you decide whether to employ the TR1 driver or the Mesa driver version. I personally have both versions installed as add-ons, allowing me to easily swap between them as needed. I personally prefer using and switching back and forth between versions like TR1, TR2, TR1, or the official mainline R8 version. Those are currently my go-to choices, offering pretty good compatibility. So for the front end, I'm currently using the Big Water Cup SD, but this SD doesn't yet have the integrated RP6 package. I simply took the Odin's integrated package and installed it directly. Then I made a few minor adjustments to the settings because both it and the Odin share the same 1920 by 1080 screen resolution, so the integrated package is mostly compatible with all these things. It's a perfect fit. And here you can also switch the display refresh rate. Most of the time 60 Hz is totally sufficient. But hey, you already bought the machine and it has 120 Hz, so why wouldn't you take full advantage of it? And something I didn't get to mention earlier, the joystick lights. You know, if you set them up just right, especially by dimming the brightness, they can actually look pretty cool. I seriously recommend turning down their brightness. Honestly, regardless of the color you choose, if you tone down the brightness and saturation, those joystick lights can truly look quite appealing. But as for me, personally, I'm just not a big fan of having lights on, so I simply keep mine switched off. And there's another point, charge separation. If your battery's low and you're plugged in, you can activate charge separation. This means it won't power the battery directly but the device itself, which significantly helps with heat management. This system also has a rather unique charging limitation. For instance, when the battery level is low, it automatically limits the charging power to extend battery life. Alternatively, you can opt not to fully charge it, stopping at 80% to prolong its lifespan. However, if you don't use it frequently, I believe it's perfectly fine. Some folks also brought up a white bar on the right side that appears once you're in a game. This white bar, for instance, observe my glasses. When I enter a game at this level, we definitely need the bottom bar. However, the top one. Yes, there's actually a bar at the top, which serves as a functional strip. If you pull it down, you can see things like button mapping, FPS, temperature, and button tests. Additionally, there are options for screen mapping and streaming capabilities here. And of course, if you're not a fan of it, you can actually swipe down here to find a floating icon. Just tap that, and this bar over here will vanish. However, the functionality that comes with it will also be gone. So, a lot of the time, if you want to use those features, you have to turn it back on. Finally, let me record some gameplay for you all.